So, Paramita, we can start.
Okay.
Paramita, can we start?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
First of all, a very warm welcome to today's webinar on comparative world literatures, which is hosted by Hindi University, West Bengal. And through this webinar, students and faculties will learn to analyze literary genre, theories, and methodologies. This session will be chaired by our Honorable Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am. And today we are honored to have the renowned literatures, the um, professors Nandini, Sinha, Kapur ma'am, and Nandini Sen ma'am. So welcome to all of you once again. And I would like to say that it is my great pleasure to welcome Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am, who is also a former director of School of Foreign Languages, IGNOU, New Delhi. And she is an established Indian English poet, folklorist, and a renowned creative writer. Not only that, she is one of the Amazon's best-selling author, and she is the author and editor of 21 books already. Apart from being a double gold medalist during her graduation and post graduation, she is also the recipient of the Literary Award, the Gold Medal from the Honorable Vice President of India for her contribution to English studies. He is the recipient of the prestigious Michael Madhusudan Academy Award 2024 and Lifetime Achievement Award 2024 as well. As a professor of English, her areas of research interest cover Hindu studies, critical theory, new literatures, Indian knowledge systems, comparative literature, children literature, folklore and studies, and American literature too. I would like to welcome Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am for the opening speech. Nandini Sahu ma'am.
Thank you, Paramita, and many congratulations for being the convener of this webinar. I welcome Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur and Professor Nandani Sen to the Hindi University Special Lecture Series as distinguished speakers for the day. Just to inform them regarding this lecture series, I would like to put a few points on record here. I took over as the Vice Chancellor of Hindi University before 45 days or so. And I had multiple meetings with the faculty members, the staff, and the students. And we decided this is a collaborative effort. We decided that we can introduce a new discipline in the university, comparative world literatures. And for that, the initial step, the first step towards introducing this new discipline is introduction of this important lecture series. This is Hindi University Special Lecture Series on Comparative World Literatures, where we are catering to the needs of the multiple languages of India, 22 approved languages, and also the 7,000 folk languages, tribal languages, and colloquial languages. We are trying to address to the research and pedagogy of all these languages. And Hindi University is basically a language university. We intend to create language archives, language departments, then use ICT, information and communication technology, for the preservation and documentation of endangered languages. Also, we aim to create chairs, very special chairs for the classical languages of India, Bengali being one of those. We are intending to create classical language chairs. We are trying to create collaborations between the folk languages, the classical languages, and the modern languages approved by the Government of India. And this lecture series has been running successfully. The first lecture was held in the month of January. The first speaker was Professor Anishur Rahman. He introduced the tone of the lecture series, after which we are having many eminent speakers from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. And I am so humbled to know that whenever I extend an invitation to any speaker in the country, look at Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur and Professor Nandini Sen, the moment I extend my invitation, they are more than happy to join and to collaborate with us to contribute to this new university, Hindi University, during the period when we are taking baby steps towards, towards creating a master and a very important language university in the country. With this, I would also like to put it on record that the faculty members and the students of this university are extremely enthusiastic whenever I proposed to do anything. Like yesterday, we had an interactive session where they told that, ma'am, we don't have a journal. Then I said, why don't we have introduce a journal in the university, something like Hindi University Journal of Interdisciplinary Studies. And immediately they agreed. And then, they volunteered. Many of them want to be the chief editors, the editors, the review editors, and very, very enthusiastically they proposed. And last evening, I already sent a mail to ISSN for receiving an ISSN number for the university journal. And the first issue of the journal will be on comparative world literatures, where we can invite papers from all the eminent speakers that we are introducing through this lecture series. And the students of the university are also extremely enthusiastic and very, very supportive. They have been, meeting me, and within 1 month, I have received multiple number of um, felicitations and welcome from the students. I feel so welcome in West Bengal. I am very grateful to the government of West Bengal and also to the government of India for having chosen me to take this role of being the founder vice chancellor of this very important university. Regarding today's lecture, Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur and Professor Nandini Sen, I extend a very warm welcome to both of you. Today's seminar sounds exceptional, sounds remarkable because of the flyer says three Nandanis are there, but trust me, this is totally coincidental. The faculty members, including Paromita, they have been talking to many experts whose mobile numbers I have shared with them, and I have asked them to invite those experts across the disciplines and across the states in the country. They have been talking to many experts, and incidentally or coincidentally, both Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur and Professor Nandini Sen accepted the invitation for the same date. So I was very glad. I said, okay, then, so one Nandini will be chairing as the vice chancellor, and two Nandinis will be speaking. And see, the flyer looks so poetic. Three Nandinis are there, where Paramita, Dr. Paramita has united three Nandinis. So this is definitely something very unique. And about Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur, she is extremely hardworking. I have known her in Indira Gandhi National Open University as a colleague and a very dear friend since near about 2 decades. And since the day one, we have that kind of rapport, that kind of an understanding, a support system where both of us have worked in tandem with each other on many things that includes the MA in Folklore and Culture Studies, which is introduced in the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies. Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur has been extremely supportive of the program for the technical reasons, for the payment of the course writers, for the creation of the audio video material, for collaborating with many other institutions where we have found our course writers. She is one of those people who does anything for work and for the institution. She has been very, very committed to the institution, and today she is not well. She has high fever. She has taken medicine. She is sitting in front of us, and she is a remarkable historian. Her research and her books in history have been very widely read all over the world. And apart from that, she has some kind of spiritual connection with higher values and with the higher powers of the universe. I have seen that personally. She has some kind of spiritual connection that makes me love and respect her even more. And as a human being, as a teacher, as a professor, she has been very, very loving and caring. The students come to her when they are hungry, they want to eat something, and faculty members come to her when they want a shoulder to cry on. She has been a very loving and an affectionate person, apart from being an exceptionally good scholar. So, Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur, I welcome you to Hindi University as a speaker today. I'm sure that the faculty and the students sitting in front of you today will be benefited by your expertise, your experience, and your research. With this, I officially, formally welcome you once again to Hindi University. Of course, Dr. Paramita, the convener, is going to introduce your work to the viewers, to the participants. Now, coming to Professor Nandini Sen. I guess I know her since 15 years or so through social media, of course.
Yes.
When Facebook was introduced, we saw each other. I thought, okay, there is one Nandini. After that, I noticed she's doing good work. After that, I saw her in one of the programs by Authors Press, where both of us were authors, and we were talking about our respective books. And she spoke in a very impactful manner. She talked about gender discourses, she talked about identity and individuality and tradition. She discussed about the role of a teacher. Most of the things that she has already written in her books are available on Amazon and everywhere. And I believe that one of her story collections is doing very well. People are reading that, and many book launches happened last couple of days. I think Second Wife and Other Stories, that is one of her good, very good story collections. I have also read a couple of stories. She is a good storyteller. Apart from that, Professor Nandini Sen is very popular. Her students love her. You just go to her social media and see how her students connect with her. Younger faculty, junior faculty members, they connect with her. She has been very caring and loving and supportive. We happen to meet at many places, once in Delhi Hat, once in some market. Some, we happen to meet, and there is this current, there is this fellow feeling, there is this spark of love between me and Professor Nandini Sen. Maybe because of being the namesakes for each other, maybe because we are like minded people, or maybe because we belong to the community of teachers, professors, where we believe in flexibility and inclusivity. We believe in extending love and a helping hand to people. So Professor Nandini Sen is also going through a very critical phase of her life, which she shared with me. But God is kind enough that she is so strong, and she came out of that critical phase with glory and with very bright colors. And today, look at her; she is in front of us, going to talk to our students and our teachers about her research. I hope and pray that she becomes 100% fine and perfect. Her health becomes perfect, which already I can see, I can foresee. And today's lecture by Professor Nandini Sen is certainly going to be helpful to the students and the teachers of India University. And for both of you, I have a request. When we are going to design the syllabus of comparative world literatures for our university, please help us, please guide our students and our faculty, recommend important texts of world literature, because we will be needing the help of the best brains of the country. And I will not shy away from telling that both of you are the best brains of the country. So I invite both of you once again to Hindi University. And I request Dr. Paramita to officially introduce and invite each one of you, both of you, one by one, to deliver your lectures. And after that, probably she will open the floor for discussions and questions from the participants. Welcome and namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Nandini Sahu, for such kind words. God bless you.
Yeah, I echo the sentiment entirely. Thank you so much, Professor Sahu. You are not just, I mean, to call you a friend is an honor. And I would say the exact same thing for Professor Sinha Kapur also. It is so wonderful knowing people and being able to belong to this tradition of teachers, this tradition of researchers, this group of people who are kind, generous, and wonderful academics. So thank you so much, Professor Sahu. This is so kind of you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, Paramita, all yours.
It is my great honor to introduce Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur ma'am, Director and Professor in IGNOU of History and Interdisciplinary Study. She has already authored 3 books. First one is State Formation in Rajasthan. Secondly, Reconstructing Identities, Tribes, Agro-Pastoralists and Environment in Western India. Third, Environment History of Early India. And she has been honored by Homi Bhabha Postdoctoral Research Fellowship, Charles Wallace India Trust Research Fellowship, Shastri Indo-Canadian Faculty Mobility Program Fellowship, UGC Indo-Netherlands Exchange Fellowship, Victoria and Albert Research Grant, among others. Her contribution in the project Sustainable Livelihood for PTG Saharia Tribe of Rajasthan is one of her great achievements. So without any delay, I would like to invite Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur ma'am for her very informative lecture. So
Uh,
Nandini
hi.
Sinha Kapur ma'am.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Paramita, for that generous introduction. I take this opportunity once again to thank the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Nandini Sahu of the Hindi University, the first founder Vice Chancellor of Hindi University of West Bengal, which is my mother state. I was born in Kolkata, but brought up in Delhi. So, thank you for the invitation, Professor Nandini Sahuji, and thank you. And it is an honor to accept this invitation. Since I come from the background of ancient and early medieval Indian history, I thought I shall briefly uh, share some introductory notes on the famous Sanskrit literature person, the author Kalidasa, who is not familiar with the name of Kalidasa, who flourished in the royal court of Chandragupta II, Vikramaditya, 5th century AD. And he belonged to Ujjain, that is one of the spiritual and one of the iconic and spiritual and religious centers of South Asia. So it's going to be quite brief, few slides, so that the students and faculty can be introduced to the title, as it says, Literary Traditions of Ancient India, an introduction to Kalidasa and his writings. In a way, in addition to literary traditions, this can also be a part of Indian knowledge system, since I'm taking you down the centuries back in ancient Indian history. So we can see the philosophical and literary skills of ancient Indians, especially the elite and those who were trained in Sanskrit. Now, let me begin this brief presentation. No, truly, let me also apologize. I may burst into cough from time to time, since I have a lot of cold and bit of fever also. No truly biographical data are preserved about the author, who nevertheless enjoyed a great popularity during his life and whom the Hindus have ever regarded as the greatest of Sanskrit poets. We are thus confronted with one of the remarkable problems of literary history. For our ignorance is not due to neglect of Kalidasa's writings on the part of his countrymen, that is, we Indians, but to the strange blindness in regard to the interest and importance of historic fact or Indian knowledge system. No European nation, this is an important point, especially for the students and for the researchers. No European nation can compare with India in critical devotion to its own literature. And when talking about the time, 5th century AD, and Europe, for instance, will find it difficult to show us the kind of literary florisance that India saw in 5th century AD. Additions, recensions, commentaries abound. Poets have sought the exact phrase of appreciation for their predecessors, yet when we seek to reconstruct the life of their greatest poet, Kalidasa, we have no material except certain and such data as we can gather from the writings of a man who hardly mentions himself. Here, just two famous books, the Meghdutta, just publications, just wanted to introduce you to the Meghdutta of Kalidas by M.R. Kale, and Complete Works of Kalidas, Volume 2, for instance, plays translated by Chandra Rajan, and it is published from Sahitya Academy. One of these legions, one of the legions which is so common about Kalidasa, deserves to be recounted, although it contains, so far as we can see, not much of historic truth. And although it places Kalidasa in Banaras 500 miles away from his native place, Ujjain, right? So, one of the legends brings him to Banaras, which is yet another iconic site, a spiritual and literary production centers, Banaras. However, we all know historically he belonged to Ujjain. Another legend represents Kalidas as engaging in a pilgrimage to a shrine of Vishnu in southern India. So, in company with two other famous writers of Sanskrit, Bhavabhuti and Dandin. Dandin's Dashakumar Charit is a very famous work, as we know. Yet another pictures Bhavabhuti as a contemporary of Kalidasa and jealous of the less austere poet's reputation. These stories must be untrue, for it is certain that the three authors were not contemporary. Yet, they show a true instinct in the belief that genius seeks genius and is rarely isolated. Also, it as a scholar of history, I should remind all of you that once Kalidasa became an iconic figure, most parts of India tried to relate themselves to that iconic literary figure, Kalidasa. For instance, on his pilgrimage to a shrine of Vishnu in southern India. However, when we come to Meghdut, we will see that he was very familiar with the geography of most of Indian subcontinent. This instinctive belief has been at work with the stories which connect Kalidasa with King Vikramaditya. I have already told you that we accept that he was the royal poet in the court of Chandragupta II of the imperial Guptas, King Vikramaditya, belonging to 5th century AD, and the other literary figures of his court. It has doubtless enlarged, yet we cannot doubt that there is truth also in this tradition. King Vikramaditya ruled in the city of Ujjain in west central India. He was mighty both in war and in peace, winning special glory by a decisive victory over the barbarians. These barbarians, I should tell you, all of you have done history up to 10th and some of you up to 12th. We are talking about the Hun invasion, the Hunas who came from Central Asia all the way up to Central India. The Huns who pressed into India through the northern passes. Though it has not proved possible to identify this monarch with any of the known rulers, that whether it is Chandragupta II, Vikramaditya, who posed a challenge to the invading Huns, although we accept as historians that it is Skandagupta, one of the later Gupta rulers who actually stopped the Huns. Though it has not proved possible to identify this monarch with any of the known rulers, there can be no doubt that he existed, that is, Chandragupta II, and had the character attributed to him. No doubt, Kalidasa intended to pay a tribute to his patron, the son of valor, that is Vikramaditya Chandragupta II, in the very title of his play, Urvashi, won by valor, Vikrama Urvashya. King Vikramaditya was a great patron of learning and of poetry. Ujjain during his reign was the most brilliant capital in the world. Among the eminent men gathered there, 9 were particularly distinguished, and these 9 are known as 9 gems. Some of the 9 gems were poets, others represented science, astronomy, medicine and lexicography. Sorry for the typos. Ujjain in the days of Vikramaditya stands worthily besides ancient Athens, Rome, Florence, and London in their great centuries. Here is the substantial fact behind the famous German Indologist Max Muller's often ridiculed theory of the Renaissance of Sanskrit literature. It might even be said that those rare and happy centuries that see a man as great as Homer or Virgil or Kalidasa or Shakespeare partake in that one man of a Renaissance. So he was equally good. It is interesting to observe that the centuries of intellectual darkness in Europe have sometimes coincided with centuries of light in India. That is what I was talking about, that 5th century AD in Europe and 5th century AD in India cannot actually be compared the kind of civilization we had achieved. The Vedas were composed for the most part before Homer. Kalidasa and his contemporaries lived while Rome was tottering under the barbarian assault. To the scanty and uncertain data of late traditions, we may add some information about Kalidasa's life gathered from his own writings. He mentions his own name only in the prologues of his three plays, and here with a modesty that is charming. One wishes for a portion of the communicativeness that characterizes some of the Indian poets. He speaks in the first person only once in the verses introductory to his epic poem, the Raghubangsham or Dynasty of Raghu. We know from Kalidasa's writings that he spent at least a part of his life in the city of Ujjain. He refers to Ujjain more than once and in a manner hardly possible to one who did not know and love the city. Especially in his poem, The Cloud Messenger or Meghadutam, does he dwell upon the city's charms and even bids the cloud make a detour in his long journey, lest he should miss making its acquaintances, we feel his modesty. We learn further that Kalidasa traveled widely in India. Just now I told you that from the reading of Meghduta, it is quite clear that he was familiar with the geography of India. And so the cloud is traveling and describing different geographies of the subcontinent. The fourth canto of Dynasty of Raghu or Raghubangsham describes a tour about the whole of India and even into regions which are beyond the borders of a narrowly measured India. It is hard to believe that Kalidasa had not himself made such a grand tour. So much of truth there may be in the tradition which sends him on a pilgrimage to southern India. The third canto of the same epic and Cloud Messenger, that is Meghdutam, also describe long journeys over India, for the most part through regions far from Ujjain. So that's really very interesting that he was on a pilgrimage to far and wide within the subcontinent, and therefore, and this is a very repetitive motive in historical narrative, whether he was actually present or not, but once he became, I'm just repeating myself again, once he became an iconic figure of Sanskrit literature, the many parts of India and literary traditions, they started claiming a relationship, association with him. This has been a repetitive motif in the South Asian history. It is the mountains which impress him most deeply. His works are full of the Himalayas. Apart from his earliest drama and the slight poem called The Seasons or Ritu Samahar, a bouquet of seasons, there is not one of them which is not fairly redolent of the mountains. One, the birth of the war god, the famous play called Kumar Sambhavam, which was written on the occasion of the birth of Kumaragupta first, Chandragupta second's first son, might be said to be all mountains, nor was it only Himalayan grandeur and sublimity which attracted him, for as a Hindu critic has acutely observed, he is the only Sanskrit poet who has described a certain flower that grows in only in Kashmir. Very interesting because Kashmir is quite far, very far from Ujjain. The sea interested him less. This is also interesting. Quite possible that he had not or he wasn't that familiar with the seasides. To him, as to most Hindus, the ocean was a beautiful, however, a terrible barrier, not a highway to adventure. The sea belted earth of which Kalidasa speaks means to him the mainland of India. He was not indeed a prodigy of learning like Bhavabhuti in his own country or Milton in England, yet no man could write as he did without hard and intelligent study. To begin with, he had a minutely accurate knowledge of the Sanskrit language at a time when Sanskrit was to some extent an artificial tongue. What I mean by artificial tongue, in a way, it was a elite tongue, right? It was not a vocabulary of the ancient Indians in the 5th century AD. We have other vocabulary, or sorry, not the vocabulary, I mean the vernaculars, right? That is Ardha Magadhi in most part of northern India, or like Prakrit. However, uh, you can read. I would like to draw your attention to this title of an American Indologist, Sheldon Pollock, the language of the god, Sanskrit. So that's why I'm mentioning it as an artificial tongue, that is the language of the elite, the Sanskrit. Every writer, especially every poet, composing in any language, writes in what may be called a strange idiom. That is, he does not write as he talks. Yet it is true that the gap between written language and vernacular was wider in Kalidasa's day. The Hindus themselves regard 12 years study as requisite for the mastery of chief of all sciences, the science of grammar, that Kalidasa had mastered this science, and his works bear abundant witness to that rule, that is 12 years study. He also had some knowledge of astronomy, the law, and Indian systems of philosophy. So he was really a very well read person. The religion of any great poet is always a matter of interest, especially the religion of a Hindu poet. Kalidasa moved among the a lot of jarring sects, that is sort of struggling with each other to prove its supremacy, their own supremacy vis-a-vis the other sect, with sympathy for all and fanaticism for none. So he was quite advanced. He did not possess loyalty, or he did not possess sort of, that I belong to this sect or that sect, but he sympathized with all the sects. The dedicatory prayers that introduce his dramas are addressed to Shiva. This is hardly more than a convention, for Shiva is the patron of literature in ancient India. If one of his epics, Birth of the War God or Kumar Sambhavam, is distinctively Shaivistic, the other, Raghuvamsham or Dynasty of Raghu, is no less Vaishnavite. I'm sorry for the typos of the spelling, in tendency. If the hymn to Vishnu in the dynasty of Raghu, that is Raghuvamsham, is an expression of Vedantic monism, the hymn to Brahma in the birth of war god, that is Kumar Sambhavam, gives equally clear expression to the rival dualism of the Sankhya system of Indian philosophy. Nor are the yoga doctrine and Buddhism left without sympathetic mention. There are certain other impressions of Kalidasa's life and personality, which gradually become convictions in the mind of one who reads and rereads his poetry. One feels certain that he was physically and a handsome Hindu, and is a wonderfully defined type of manhood. One knows that he possessed a very, this is a very interesting intervention, that he possessed a fascination for women as they in turn fascinated him. One also knows that children loved him. He moved among men and women with a serene and godlike trait, neither self indulgent nor ascetic, with mind and senses even alert to every form of beauty. We know that his poetry was popular while he lived, and we cannot doubt that his personality was equally attractive. For his nature was one of singular balance, equally at home in a splendid court and on a lonely mountain, with men of high and of low degree. Such men are never fully appreciated during life. They continue to grow after they are dead. Kalidasa left 7 works which have come down to us: 3 dramas, 2 epics, 1 elegiac poem. Elegiac the term is derived from a Greek term, eligos, which means a lament. You know, like you are mourning or grieving over the loss of a loved one or the death of a near one. And 1 descriptive poem. I'll just sort of read out once again. There are 2 big epic poems of the 7, the list of his 7 works. Kumar Sambhavam, that is birth of Kumar, that is Kumar Gupta 1. Then Raghuvangsha, dynasty of Raghu. Now I come to 3 minor poems. Meghdut, the cloud messenger. Ritu Samhara, the gathering of the seasons. Kalidasa Sutra, also known as Dhanya Loka. And there are plays, very famous one, Abhigyan Shakuntalam, right? The recognition of Shakuntala. We are all familiar with that. She had to show the ring that King Dushyant had given her, so that she was the woman. Then Vikrama Urvashiyam, pertaining to Vikram and Urvashi, and finally Malavika Agnimitram, Malavika and Agnimitra, the story of King Malavika, the King Agnimitra and Malavika. Many other works, including even an astronomical treatise, have been attributed to him. They are certainly not his, but here I would, as a scholar of ancient Indian history, I would like to draw your attention, as I said, uh, since he became an iconic figure, many of the successive literary traditions tried to claim legitimacy from his name, whether it was his work or not. Same thing happened with the famous Chanakya's Arthashastra. Arthashastra or Kautilya's Arthashastra was not written by the entire corpus of that literature called Arthashastra, was not written by him, or it was not the product of one generation alone, but it's a huge corpus, that is Chanakya's Arthashastra. Many successive generations continued to write on Indian statecraft, political economy, but just added it as a successive chapters under Kautilya's Arthashastra. So similar process happened with Kalidasa too. So there is an astronomical treatise which have been attributed to him, but certainly not written by him, by Kalidasa himself. Perhaps there was more than one author who bore the name Kalidasa. That is also a possibility, that later on the popular name was appropriated by a successive generation. Perhaps certain later writers were more concerned for their work rather than for personal fame. On the other hand, there is no reason to doubt that the 7 recognized works were definitely written by Kalidasa himself. The only one concern is there is reasonable room for suspicion is the short poem Ritu Samhar, and this is fortunately the least important of the 7. So there is a debate whether Ritu Samhar, that is the bouquet of seasons, was really written by Kalidasa himself or by a successive author. However, it's not such an important fact. Of these 7 works, 4 are poetry, the 3 dramas, like all Sanskrit dramas, were written in prose with a generous mingling of lyric and descriptive stanzas. The poetry, even in the epics, is stanzaic. No part of it can fairly be compared to English blank verse. Classical Sanskrit verse, so far as structure is concerned, has much in common with familiar Greek and Latin forms. It makes no systematic use of rhyme. It depends for its rhythm, not upon the accent but upon quantity. Kalidasa's three dramas bear the names Malavika and Agnimitra, that is Malavika, Agnimitra, Urvashi, Vikrama Urvashi, and Avigyan Shakuntala. The two epics are the dynasties of Raghu, I have already introduced, I'm just repeating, and Kumar Sambhavam, or the birth of war god. The elegiac poem, who is called the Cloud Messenger or Meghduta, which is a kind of a lamentation. And the descriptive poem is entitled The Season or Ritu Samar. It may well be said to state briefly the more salient features of the Sanskrit honors to which these works belong. The drama proved in India, as in other countries, as congenial form to many of the most eminent poems. The Indian drama has a marked individuality, but stands nearer. Please note this, stands nearer to the modern European theatre than to that of ancient Greece. For the plays, with a very few exceptions, have no religious significance and deal with love between a man and a woman. Although tragic elements may be present, a tragic ending is forbidden. Very interesting. So tragic elements are present. However, tragic ending is not highlighted, it is forbidden. The female parts were played by women. So we can see empowerment of women and women in public life, because the many of the female characters were played by women themselves. The plays very rarely have long monologues, even the inevitable prologue being divided between the two speakers, but a Hindu audience was tolerant of lyrical digression. Whether you call it Hindi or the Indian audience, who could also be Buddhist or Jain at that point of time. It may be said, though the statement needs qualification in both directions, that the Indian dramas have less action and less individuality in the characters, but more poetical charm than the dramas of modern Europe. On the whole, Kalidasa was remarkably faithful to the ingenious but somewhat over-elaborate conventions of Indian dramaturgy. His first play, Malavika Agnimitram, is entirely conventional in plot. Abhigyan Shakuntalam is transfigured by the character of the heroine Shakuntala. Vikram Urvashi, in spite of detailed beauty, marks a distinct decline. Raghuvansham and Kumar Sambhavam belong to a species of composition which is not easy to name accurately. It is best, perhaps, to use the term epic and to qualify the term by explanation. The Cloud Messenger, or the Meghduta, is more like an elegiac poem, though it would not perhaps meet the test of a rigid definition. It's a new genre. The short descriptive poem, the Ritu Samhar, has abundant analogues in other literatures. It was a reasonable conjecture, though nothing more, that Urvashi was written late when the poet's powers were on the decline. And the introductory stanzas of Raghuvamsham suggest that this epic was written before the Kumar Sambhavam that he wrote, Birth of the War God, though the inference is far from certain. Again, it is reasonable to assume that the great works on which Kalidasa's fame chiefly rests, Avigyan Shakuntalam, Meghdutam, Raghuvamsham, the first 8 cantos of Kumar Sambhavam were composed when he was in prime of manhood. I'm going to sort of speed up. Kalidasa's glory depends primarily upon the quality of his work, yet would be much diminished if he had failed in bulk and variety. In India, more than would be the case in Europe, the extent of his writing is an indication of originality and power. For the poets of the classical period underwent an education that encouraged and exaggerated fastidiousness, and they wrote for a public meticulously critical. So this is also an important point. Let us make a note of it, that the audience, whether they were audience who were watching the play and the playing of the epic play, or they were listening to the epic poem, they were meticulously critical. So We Indians, particularly in urban India, where we were into, in ancient India, we were into education and quite well educated. Kalidasa preserves his intellectual balance and his spiritual initiative. What greatness of soul is required for this? Everyone knows who has ever had the misfortune to differ in opinion from an intellectual clique. It is hardly possible to say anything true about Kalidasa's achievement which is not described above. So we have summed up more or less Kalidasa's quality and characteristics, an introduction, as I say, introduction to most of his famous, the list of seven works. The best proof of poet's greatness is the inability of men to live without him. In other words, his power to win and hold through centuries the love and admiration of his own people, especially when the people has shown itself capable of high intellectual and spiritual achievement. For something like 1500 years, Kalidasa has been more widely read in India, of course, than any other author who wrote in Sanskrit. A letter writer, speaking of Kalidasa and another poet, is more laconic in this alliterative line. Alliterative line means, a sound which repeats itself. Bhasa hasa Kalidasa bilasa. That is, Bhasha, who was a famous Sanskrit author, is mat. That is, he's a satirical. Kalidasa is grace. Though Kalidas has not been as widely appreciated in Europe as it deserved, he is the only Sanskrit poet who can properly be said to have been appreciated. Here he must struggle with the truly Himalayan barrier of language, since there will never be many Europeans, even among the cultivated, who will find possible to study the integrate Sanskrit language. There remains only one means of presentation. When Sir William Jones, the founder of the Royal Asiatic Society of Bengal, first translated Abhigyan Shakuntalam in 1789, his work was enthusiastically received in Europe. And most warmly, as was fitting, by the greatest living poet of Europe. Since that day, as is testified by new translations and by reprints of the old, there have been many thousands who have read at least one of Kalidasa's works. Thousands have seen it on the stage in Europe and America. I'm about to conclude now. No other poet in any land has sung of happy love between a man and a woman as Kalidasa sang. Every one of his works is a love poem, however much more it may be. Yet the theme is so infinitely varied that the reader never uh, uh, wears out. Kalidasa's love poetry rings as true in our ears as did in his countrymen. Vikrama Urvashya is ready to change and greatly endure a tragic story given him by long tradition in order that a loving pair may not be permanently separated. It is perhaps an inevitable consequence of Kalidasa's subject that his women appeal more strongly to a modern reader than his men. So let us remember in a simple English sentence that Kalidasa was definitely a women-centric writer, a heroine-centric writer. The man is the more variable phenomena, and the male characters were more of a variable nature. And though manly virtues are the same in all countries and centuries, the emphasis has been variously laid. But the true woman seems timeless, universal. Be it Shakespeare or who has given the world a group of heroines so individual yet so universal that can only have been done by Kalidasa. Kalidasa could not understand women. Very, very interesting point, yet another that emerges from this short introduction, without understanding children. So there is a very kind of maternalistic love also in him. It would be difficult to find anywhere lovelier pictures of childhood than those in which our poet presents the little Bharata, Ayus, Raghu, and Kumara, that is Kumara Sambhavam, Raghu of Raghuvansha. It is a fact worth noticing that Kalidasa's children are all boys. Isn't that a little funny? But I mean, he is a very woman-centric, a very heroine-centric author. But when it comes to children, he focuses on boys, on little boys. Maybe he spent his life among the the princess, the Yuvarajas. Beautiful as his women are, he never does more than glance at a little girl. So, little girls are not really in the core of his writings, but as far as children are concerned, but women were always timeless and universal. With that, I conclude my very brief presentation, and this we can read through, or we may skip. Another pervading note of Kalidasa's writing is his love of external nature, but it is equally important because environment and environmental studies are very, very center stage in modern world today. No doubt it is easier for an ancient Indian or a Hindu with his almost instinctive belief in reincarnation to feel that all life from plant to God is truly one. Yet none, even among the Hindus, has expressed this feeling with such convincing beauty as has Kalidasa. Kalidasa has beautifully portrayed the nature of India, be it the Himalayas or other parts of India in Meghdootam and in Ritusamar. It is hardly true to say he personifies rivers and mountains and trees. To him, they have a conscious individuality. So every tree, every flower, every hill, every mountain, it has a conscious individuality as truly and as certainly as animals or men or gods. So they have personalities just as an animal, a man, a woman, or a god. So, fully to appreciate Kalidasa's poetry, one must have spent weeks at least among wild mountains and forests untouched by men. There, the conviction grows that trees and flowers are indeed individuals fully conscious of the personal life and happy in that life. So I conclude my presentation, and these are some of the old publications which, like A. MacDonald's History of Sanskrit Literature, published as early as 1900, and MacDonald's Kalidasa in Encyclopedia Britannica, and I have listed a few more. These are very one of the early publications. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Nandini. You could manage little more than 30 minutes. I was wondering you were not well, still you were managing so well. And well, thank you so much. So our takeaway from your lecture, before we give 30 minutes to Professor Nandini, I will just be very, very brief. I will take a couple of minutes to give my remarks on your lecture. Today, the takeaway from your lecture was like a lot of intense and engaging discussion on Raghuvansa, Kumara Sambhava, Meghadutam, Ritu Samhara, Avigyana Sakuntalam, and Malavika Agnimitra. I have read all of them, so I could only brush up whatever I had read. And you talked about Indian knowledge systems, the critical devotion tradition of the critical devotion vis-a-vis Kalidasa, and then the South Asian history, where somehow the comparative world literature pedagogy comes in. And then the American Indologists, yes, when we design our syllabus on comparative world literature, so we will take this point from your lecture that American Indologists were deeply influenced by the theatrical tradition of India, especially by Kalidasa. And then in India and the world, the literary traditions were going parallelly. Similar traditions were going parallelly in Oriental and Occidental, both the traditions. That's what I thought when I was listening to you very keenly. Also, you emphasized gender discourses in world literature. And I was just taking the points when you talked the universality of Kavya tradition in Kalidas. That is something very important, especially Sanskrit literature, especially epic poetry, Mahakavya, that shares structural and thematic similarities with Greek, Roman, and Chinese classical traditions. When you talk about India and then Greek, Roman, and Chinese classical traditions, you can find a lot of similarities like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey or Virgil's Aeneid. So those texts, how we can create comparison between
Yes.
Kalidasa with those literary texts. So I thought about that. And then another point that I have taken from you is historical consciousness in Sanskrit and world epics, and then Indian knowledge systems and the civilizational memory. So memory culture or memory studies is coming up in a big way.
Yes.
So I think we should do some research or some introduction in the syllabus on the Puranas and the Itihas function as
Yes.
the
Yes.
yes, as the repositories of historical and philosophical knowledge. And then Kalidas's use of history in Raghuvan, so it can illuminate the civilizational memory and the dynastic legitimacy. Then
Yes.
also, when you come to the aesthetic theories of Russia and poetics, Bharata's Natya Shastra and Kalidasa's poetic compositions, they developed the Rus theory, which can be compared to Aristotle's poetic and Japanese now theater. So I have taken this clue from your lecture, and I'm trying to develop something more on that. And the researches on emotional depth of Kalidasa's poetry versus the Western dramatic traditions can be very insightful, and we will delve deeper into this. And when you concluded by saying that environmental and ecological consciousness were things that Kalidasa kept thinking about when he wrote his uh, plays, Kalidasa's works like Meghaduta and Ritusamhara, they display ecological sensitivity similar to, again, Japanese poetry by Basho and Libai. So maybe we can make some comparative study between these two. And then Sanskrit literature, seasonal and geographical consciousness can be compared with European pastoral poetry like Virgil's, Georgics. So that's one text. We can maybe compare these two. And then again, when you hinted at the gender discourses of Kalidasa, I thought about women, agency, and love poetry. Kalidasa was a great poet of love. And then, the comparative study with the Greek like Sappho and Persian like Hafiz and Japanese like, Murasaki Sikobu, they are poets. Romantic poetry can be compared with, the love poetry by Kalidasa. And then Sanskrit drama and global theatrical traditions. Yes, you emphasized that, and we would look at that with some kind of cross-cultural framework so that we can design our syllabus in a very inclusive manner when it comes to world literatures. Then the philosophical themes in Sanskrit and world literature. Well, nothing less is expected from the Director of School of Interdisciplinary Studies when she talks about literature, history, and philosophy in a very new historicist way or in a very beautiful manner while theorizing with cultural materialism. So we will think about these things like Sufi poetry and Greek Stoicism, then Taoism. A lot of things can come into this. And then the linguistic legacy and the translation studies. Kalidasa has to be translated. He has been translated, but we have a school of translation studies where the faculty members and the students are constantly working on translation theory and pedagogy. Probably they can rethink about the linguistic legacy and translation studies vis-a-vis Kalidasa, and then also compare Kalidasa to some very important and interesting texts worldwide. And you concluded by talking about epigraphy, inscriptions, and cultural documentation. This is certainly very important. Kalidasa's historical and literary references match real dynastic records like the Gupta inscriptions. And the research on Kalidasa can compare Sanskrit epigraphic traditions with Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets or Roman inscriptions to examine the historical documentation methods. So many critical pedagogies and critical things can come together when we introduce Kalidasa, kind of a powerful not just a writer, he's a movement, he's a school of thought. When we introduce him into our syllabus, we will definitely talk to you to help us out. And for today, thank you very much for this very interesting and very important lecture. Please share your PowerPoint presentation with us. We will share that with faculty and students. Thanks a lot. Now, Paramita, you may like to invite Professor Nandini Sen, and you may officially invite her. Professor Nandini Sen, I welcome you once again.
I just take a half a minute. Thank you so much, Professor Nandini Sahu, the Honorable Vice Chancellor, ma'am, for wonderfully summarizing and highlighting the takeaway points. And I just wanted to say, I just learned comparative history also from you just now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. And
Yes,
thank you,
madam.
Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur, ma'am, for such a captivating lecture. Now, to expand on today's topic further, I would like to welcome an eminent author and professor, Nandini Sen, ma'am. Nandini Sen, ma'am, teaches English in Delhi University. She was a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. She is the recipient of Charles Wallace Fellowship for Academic Research in London, the Ambassador for Peace Prize for her work towards educating slum dwellers, and Write India Award for creative writing. She won the Best Lecturer Award from the Government of Delhi, acknowledging her contribution to higher education. Along with this, she writes on diaspora studies, African studies, and comparative literature. Some of her academic publications include The Black Swan's Peaks, a study of Flora Nwapa and Buchi Ameseda, through the Diaspora Lens Volume 1 and 2 in 2017 and 2018, and Mahasmita Devi Critical Perspectives. Her short stories have been featured in literary journals such as The Elusive Jenner and The Muse. She has been featured in the Asian Collective of Short Stories and Australia India collaboration, The Glass Walls. Her recent book, The Second Wife and Other Stories, is a collection of critically acclaimed feminist stories. With this, now I would like to invite Professor Nandini Sen ma'am for her very enlightening lecture. Professor Nandini Sen ma'am.
Thank you so much. Am I audible? Excuse me. Thank you so much, primarily Professor Sahu, for being so kind to call you to, call me virtually to your university. And I promise you, because Kolkata is home for me, I'm there very often, and I will definitely visit the university in person and try and help you in your excellent endeavors.
Most
I
welcome.
think the government of India and the government of West Bengal could not have done better than finding you for being the first vice chancellor for this very, very promising university. So all my best wishes to you, to your students, to all the faculty members here. I'm looking forward to seeing great things happening at your end. The brief chat that I had with Professor Sahu, where she told me that you guys were planning on having this, this comparative world literature department, made me immediately fall back on my research of quite some time now, if I may say so. So I have been studying and teaching African literature, and very interestingly, and in a very convoluted manner, I will say, I started discovering Indian literature, Bangla literature, which is actually my own literature. But because I never stayed in West Bengal, my knowledge of Bangla literature was very scattered. I've been reading Bangla, I read a lot of Bangla, but mostly my reading was what I could lay my hands on, and mostly books that I could ferret from my grandfather's library have been the books that I have read in Bangla, because I never did anything structured. I've never lived in Bengal. But then when I started reading African texts and stories, and started meeting, I was traveling, I was meeting people, talking to them, and I started seeing that there were so many commonalities. And of course, that very famous poem of Tagore kept coming back to haunt me, where he's apologizing to Africa for the way it has been treated. And then, things started to fall in place, that not only was there their similarities, not just about being women, but being women of color, but being women dominated by patriarchy in a certain way. So those commonalities were very definitely there. But more than that, what I started questioning was, our approach to world literatures via the West. So that one-on-one. So recently I was also traveling in Brazil, and I realized, why don't we have these south-south collaborations? Because believe you me, uh, looking at a worldview from the West colors it in a certain manner. But when you have a south-south collaboration, because these are countries, these are places which have lived, developed, faced colonialism in a certain manner, and therefore have evolved cultures of their own, which are as far back as Professor Sahu was just talking about, the great Indian cultures and writings that we have seen, to the current day situation where we are evolving as a superpower, or we've already evolved as a superpower, and in this superpower, what are women doing? Where do they stand? Um, so I think it would be worthwhile, because so many of you might be young scholars. I can't see you all because we are doing this virtually, but I'm sure these are areas that you would want to explore, and these are areas that need to be looked at. Finding our own vision, finding our own connects. So without further ado, let me latch into the paper, lest I take too much time. So I've called it I don't know how to get rid of this. Just give me a minute. No. Just one sec. Yeah. No, again, I'm back here. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Um, so I've called it the decolonial women writers, their struggles and their stories. And I'm looking at two texts primarily. I mean, I could look at several texts. I could give you when we discuss the syllabus making or whatever, I could give you a collection of stories, collection of writing we could look at. But currently, for this purpose, I'm looking at two particular stories. One, a writer from your city, from Kolkata, Mohashita Devi, who I have been privileged to be able to interview, to spend some time with her. And she's one of the most remarkable women I've ever met in my whole life. It's been such an honor. And one, an African writer settled in London. And then the kind of stuff that she has written, which I found an incredible link with Mohashita's writing. And that's the story that I will be sharing with you people, hoping that you pick up both the writers, read them, and not just these writers. I will share other names with you if you all are interested. So feminism with a small f is something that I like playing around with, and it's something that was given to us by Buchi Emecheta. Now, all of you would know that feminism is, overall, the feminist theories that we use have pretty much come to us via the West. And this happened to me with Mohashita Di as well. When I asked her, "Are you a feminist?" and it's there in my book on her, she went off into this long, winding answer, and then she said, "No, but I'm not a feminist. I write for every underprivileged person. So it's not just women, I write for everybody." So there is this thing, both Emecheta and her mentor Flora Nwapa, they are a little iffy about being called feminists, and there are multiple reasons to it. So Buchi Emecheta came up with this fun phrase, which I like using, and I think all of us somewhere might be feminists with a small f. And as I go along, I will explain what I mean by feminist with a small f. So the things that I will discuss here are motherhood, concept of epics, and her stories. We have so many his stories, we have so many histories written by men, for the men, by the men. So here are these heard stories, not much heard, not much talked about, kept under the carpet, swept under the carpet. In this case, I'm talking about two authors, like I said, one from your part of the world, your city, Moashita, and one from a faraway place, Nigeria, and eventually London. That's from where Emecheta comes from. We were talking comparative world literature. So what is comparative world literature? There's a simple definition that you'll find anywhere. It's an interdisciplinary field, studies literature across languages, time, periods, national borders, explores the connection between literature and other arts, such as music, film, painting. So here I'm looking at two authors. Of course, I'm using Mahashita's text in English, but what do we have here? So one author whose natural language, she belongs to the Igbo tribe, and her natural language is not English. She trained herself in English, and eventually she writes in English. And then we have an author who has written in Bangla all along, and her works, her entire works have yet not been translated. They are still in the process of being translated, because she has been an extremely prolific writer. So in this case, I'm using Mahashweta, who's been translated by Gayatri Spivak. in a volume which I think all of you are familiar with, called the breast stories. Now, we can have, when we talk translations and when we talk breast stories, we can discuss that ad nauseum, whether that was a good name to give or not to give. And but having said that, that's the text of Mahashata's that I'm using. I'm not using the Bangla text. And Buchi Emecheta wrote in English. She's an Anglophone African writer, so her text is in English. It's an academic field, again, dealing with literature, cultural expressions across linguistic, national, and geographic and disciplinary boundaries. That's what we are doing. And it's frequently practiced with works of different languages. So we already talked about the language factor. I'm dealing with 2 different languages here, different meters, different pronunciations, different, even when, let's say writers like us, and Professor Sahu will bear me out on this, even if writers like us, we are writing in English because the kind of education that we have received, English willy-nilly becomes your first language in a certain way. But there is that mother tongue, there is the second language that we speak. So, all of that finds its way into the language that we eventually produce. Which some would call English, which Salman Rushdie calls chutneyfication of language. We can give it multiple names. We can give it whatever name that we choose to. Fag end of the day, that's our language. We own the language and we express in the language the way we know and we understand it. And that's what we are going to be doing here. So Emecheta's language is also not your Queen's English. There are multiple Igbo words. The setting is in Igbo land. There are all the myths and all the storytelling that the Igbo tribes do. And Mohasheta, you know her work. She is multifaceted. Her language is so complex because it has the Adivasi language. It has the Kolhan way of speaking and behaving. And she used to be that one writer who would travel to the lands that she was talking about. So even if she wrote about Jhansi Ki Rani, she actually traveled to Bundelkhand, sat with the tribals there, talked to them, and discovered that Jhansi Ki Rani was alive in Bundelkhand. They wrote poetry about her. They sang her songs. पत्थर मिट्टी के फौज बनाई काट के तलवार. Mohashada writes about all of this, and all that finds its way into her Bengali writing. So it's a very interesting thing. Even if we are dealing with different languages here, we're dealing with different registers. We are dealing with how do I say it? I'm not a language expert, but we're dealing with different meters within linguistic traditions, and that's what we are dealing with. So 2 different writers, 2 different parts of the work, 2 different languages, and let's look at the thoughts that they eventually convey to us. So comparative literature also concerns itself with the literature broadly defined spheres of human activity, including history, politics, philosophy, art, folklore. All of this we will talk about. Of course, we don't have too much time, so we can't go into detail, but anytime you can reach me, and I will be happy to share my notes on all of this. So unlike other forms of literary study, what we are also doing here is we are placing emphasis on the interdisciplinary nature within the economy, political dynamics, cultural movements, and the historical shifts. So when we study an author, these are the basic parameters on which we look at the author. We cannot take the author away from her historical space or her linguistic space or her cultural space. And then we look at the author as to how she was writing or what she was writing and what she was trying to convey given all of these spaces. This is Mahasheta Devi, and these are her dates. This is Emecheta. So you can see they're almost contemporaries. Mahasheta, born in 26. She was born in 44. She passed in 2017. Mahasheta passed in 2016. So kind of contemporary authors. Until very recently, they were, and both extremely prolific in the sense you will find a lot of writing by them, a lot of videos by them. They have talked on various occasions. They have, so these are not just people who wrote. These were activists. These were women who were talking about their experiences within their social milieu. So there are multiple videos there, and both of them. Oh yeah, another commonality. Both of them were professors of English. That's how they started their lives and eventually went on to do other things. So you'll have all of those commonality. And as you can see, the three professors of English, we love talking, we love discussing. So that is something you'll see these authors doing too. So you'll find multiple videos where they're talking about their lives, their past lives, their husbands, their children, their societies, and how they negotiated it given their particular colored situation or particular political situation or particular situation which they were in at that point of time. So I don't want to discuss feminist theory because I'm sure all of you have a notion of the feminist theory. But the only thing that I'll talk about is that when we look at these authors, one of the things that we very definitely do is uh, try and look at them through the third wave feminist theory, where we are discussing race, ethnicity, class, religion, gender, and nationality are significant factors while discussing feminism. So a lot of third world feminists have actually spoken against this rubric of feminism in which every woman writer is sort of counted, because they feel that their lives and their situations are different. And one situational difference I will tell you, because one of the African writers actually says this. She says, we are not writers in spite of our children, we are writers because of our children. So it's not that exclusive. You remember all the time we are talking about Virginia Woolf's Room of Her Own, and she talks about it very passionately. I do agree. Yes, in order to be a writer, in order to be a thinker, you do need your space where you can create, where you can be by yourself. But as we all know, and many of you are academics here, I can't see you, so I don't know. I'm sure there are many women academics here. We know that we are managing multiple things at multiple points of time. While we do appreciate that space which we might have for ourselves, but our space is often shared. And a shared space which we enjoy, shared by our family, by our children, by people, by society, by everything. And we write because of that. We don't write in spite of that. So these are some very minor differences I'm talking about. As you read, you will see what Chandra Talpade Mohanty or Gayatri Spivak, what are they talking about? What kind of feminism does third world feminists do third world feminists talk about? And this is something that you will see reflected in the kind of feminisms that we are going to be talking over here. The African writers, most of them did not settle down with the idea. So they kept coming up with their own versions. Somebody called it womanism, Alice Walker's womanism, and that's American literature for you, or Black American literature for you. Some of them talked about motherism. That is something that I will also talk about. So, what is motherism, and where do these women come in when we talk about motherism? So women of color, so your Latin America, Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, so on and so forth. While it may be legitimately argued that there is no one school of thought on feminism, it's not like a monolith. There are multiplicity of voices, multiplicity of takes on the matter, and this one thing which one definition which I'll read out to you. While it may be legitimately argued that there is no one school of thought on feminism among the first world feminists, who are not, after all, monolithic, there is still among the third world women a widely accepted perception that the feminism emerging from white middle class Western women narrowly confines itself into a struggle against gender discrimination, as says Cheryl Johnson Odom. And however, let me also add that there is no monolithic definition here either, because every writer defines feminism in his or her own way. Let me put it that way. So African feminism becomes necessary in part due to the white Western women's exclusion of the experiences of the Black woman and the continental African woman. So white Western feminists did not, at one point of time, now they do, take into account the particular issues that these women have been facing at the intersection of both their Blackness and their womanhood. And that's why calling themselves women of color and defining for themselves what do they understand by feminism. So these are two authors. I will talk only about one. I've written extensively about both of these women, Flora Nwapa, who continued to live and write in Africa. Now, I don't know if you're familiar. There's a very famous writer. Whenever you study African literature, you cannot not study him, Chinua Achebe. I would recommend very heartily his trilogy. Please pick it up and read it. It'll give you a whole sort of, you'll see how, what the pre-colonial times were, what the colonial times were, and then finally, his most famous book, Things Fall Apart. And Things Fall Apart pretty much coincided with the Nigerian independence. And Things Fall Apart went on to become a huge hit, loved across the world and taught in every possible African department across the world. Now, Nwapa was writing pretty much at the same time when Achebe was writing. But interestingly, no one picked up Nwapa's book to read. And the criticism that was leveled against Nwapa was she writes about women's issues. She writes only about women. So that was not something that the critics wanted to read, know, or learn about, because um, uh, so it's interestingly the problem area for Nwapa was not the British. It was her own people who refused to pick up her book because she was talking about women, and that was not supposed to be a topic to be discussed. And interestingly, Nwapa talked very much about women, about pre-colonial women, about colonial women, about post-colonial women, about working women. So women were at the center of her works. And not only was she focusing on the women, she was talking about women as in extremely positive manners, because she felt that these are the people who are bringing about a difference in the society. These are the people who can bring about. So Nigeria went through a horrendous phase after its freedom. There was this terrifying civil war which happened. Some of you who've read Chimamanda Adichie and some of you who've read Achebe would know that. And it was absolutely it took away from this great freedom which they had won, to the absolutely traumatic civil war where brothers were fighting against brothers. So Nwapa's women characters are very interesting. While the men are talking about war and nationalism and, oh, how we should win and this and that, what is the mother of the family doing? She's ensuring that there is petrol in the car. If there is a requirement to run away, they will know that they'll be able to drive somewhere. She's more fussed about what her children should eat, and stocking that. And a few more steps ahead, they women started their own stalls. Now, Nigerian women, right from the very beginning, these are tribal women we are talking about. They were never stay at home, and allowing the men to work and the women stay at home. That was not the concept at all. So women were working all the time. They were working in the fields, they were earning. They were market women. They would go to the market and sell their wares, and all of that. So these were very industrious women. They were not women of leisure, if I may put it that way. So Nwapa focuses on this, on the this thing about how very industrious these women are, who start a trade right under the noses of soldiers. They would trade across borders. So how women are able to keep this trade going, keep their families going, contribute to the war in their own manner, take care of the children while they're doing it. So this kind of multitasking, and yet the expectation within the patriarchal setup was that, okay, you've done your bit. Now that the war is over, go right back to the homes and shut yourselves up and don't show your faces again. That did not happen. So Nwapa managed to talk a lot about it, and then when she realized that nobody was quite ready to publish her, she actually sent her manuscript to Achebe, who spoke very highly of her work, and it was sent um, to Heinemann Press, from where Achebe himself had been published, and then she was published. But eventually, she started her own press. She was a civil servant. She worked very hard towards uniting orphan children who had gotten lost during this terrifying civil war. And why am I telling you Emecheta's story? Because sorry, why am I telling you Nwapa's story? Because Emecheta, sitting in London in that cold, where when she managed to write her first manuscript, her husband burnt it all. So that's where her entire manuscript went. Those were not days of computers and laptops where you could save a copy. It was all handwritten and it was burnt. But sitting there, seeing her life's work getting burnt, what Emecheta could only think about was, if Nwapa can write, so can I. So, these positive examples of women are so important to enable the next generation or their fellow sisters to move forward. Um, okay. So, these are two quotes by both women. So, Nopa says, when I do write about women in Nigeria, in Africa, I try to paint a positive picture about women because there are many women who are very, very positive in their thinking, who are very, very independent and very, very industrious. And Emicheta says, I would tell a girl, you must get your education. So Emicheta constantly focuses on education because it is through her education that she was able to survive in that alien land and eventually become a writer. That's true anywhere in the world. And I think we would all agree that for a woman, independence comes through her industriousness, and through her education. Both the things cannot be emphasized enough. So what is this feminism with a small f that I keep talking about? So Emiteta attempts a little bit of a discussion here where she says, I did not start as a feminist. I do not think I'm one now. Most of my readers would take this as a statement of a coward, but it's not. I thought before that I would like to be one, but after my recent visit to the United States, when I talked to the real feminists with capital F, I think we women of African background have a long way to go before we can really rub shoulders with such women. So, my sisters in America, I'm not shunning your advanced help. I still think women of Africa need your contribution. And at the same time, we need our men. Now, this is very interesting. So, many of you, and also because of this bad representation of feminism that we have in popular cinema and otherwise, a feminist is supposed to be this, this male bashing, whatever, Dracula or something. Well, believe you me, that's not true. You have male feminists. I mean, we are who we are because we had feminist men raising us. We have feminist men for partners and so on and so forth. So, which is why she says we love our men and we love our children because they are who they are, who allow us to grow, albeit maybe the pace might be different, but to each their own space and to each their own pace for growth. But as long as you are there as a support system for your sister and your daughter, metaphorically speaking, you are a feminist. Okay. One sec. What happened here? Okay. So then she goes on to say, and this is Mwapa. She says, I want to say something about feminism. Years back, when I go on my tours to America and Europe, I'm usually asked, are you a feminist? I deny that I'm a feminist. Please, I'm not a feminist. Oh, please. But they say, big F, because Obioma said on Monday that feminist is about possibilities. There are possibilities. There are possibilities. There are choices. Let us not be afraid to say that we are feminists. We need one another. We really need one another. Globally, we need one another. So there is this thought, and this would have come to us in the 1950s, I would say, or yeah, early 1960 or in the 1950s. Since then, we are talking about a global cooperation. But till date, unfortunately, that one on one cooperation, which ideally we should be having, has not quite happened. And I think that is something that we really need to work towards, where we develop a very strong South South dialogue. I mean, that is something I very passionately believe in. So, Buchia Mecheta, I will talk to you a little about her life because her life is like her text. The text happened because she's the way she was. So, her father was a railway worker and molder. And because of the gender bias that existed, they had just enough money to educate one child and they educated the male child. And then eventually, she went to an all-girls missionary school. And when she was just 9, her father died. And the good part was that she was a very bright child. So she managed to win a lot of scholarships within school. And so her school education continued without stopping. And finally, in 1960, she married Sylvester Onwardie, a schoolboy with whom she'd been engaged since she was 11 years of age. And after that, she gave birth to a daughter. And in 61, the younger son was born. And Onwardie moved to London to attend the university, and Amecheta joined him there with 2 children. After that, she gave birth to 5 children in 6 years, 3 daughters and 2 sons. Marriage was extremely unhappy and sometimes very violent, as chronicled in her autobiographical writings, Second Class Citizen. And actually, the thing that she wrote was Head Above Water, because that's how she envisaged her situation, that somehow she could keep her head above water. That's how she existed. Now, to keep her sanity, she started writing in her spare time, but the husband started getting suspicious, something that I've told you. And eventually, he landed up burning her manuscript. At the age of 22, mind you, pregnant with her 5th child, she leaves her husband. While working to support her children alone, she managed to get a BSc honors degree in sociology in 72. And then in 84, her autobiography, Head Above Water, and this is her quote: "As for my survival for the past 20 years in England, from when I was little over 20, dragging 4 cold and dripping babies with me and pregnant with a 5th one, that is a miracle indeed." And then she eventually gets her PhD in 1991. So she's accomplished, she's educated, she's a professor, and so on. And she was one of those rare people. This is the 60s and 70s London we are talking about. Racism was rampant. And then she was able to live off her writing, which in itself is a miracle. Writers, even today in contemporary world, realize that living off your creative writing is rather difficult. She managed that. The book that I'm talking about here is called The Joys of Motherhood. Now, it's a very interesting title. It's called The Joys of Motherhood, but look at the picture that you have here. And I think that should pretty much tell you about the joys that exist of motherhood. So here you see a mother who's, who's walking with great difficulty with a stick. And then there are these 2 little children whom she's hoisting on her back. Now, motherhood in Africa and motherhood within the Igbo society is something which is worshipped, something which is glorified, something which is considered to be absolutely holy. So this is what we call the Neka, or Mother is Supreme. So this is the shrine of the mother. So a pregnant woman, a mother, and if she is able to have 10 children, then she's celebrated. Recently, I was in Orissa, and on way to I think from Cuttack to Puri, if I'm not mistaken, there is a bridge which is called, and Professor Sahu can later remind me because I'm forgetting. It's a bridge which celebrates a mother who has 18 children, if I'm not mistaken. There is a bridge of the kind where if you have 18 children, then the mother is supposed to walk on that bridge and she's going to be celebrated. So numerous children make you very, very popular, gives you a certain position in the society. And this, as you can very well see, this is the tribal wooden replica of what is called Neka, which means mother is supreme. So the same woman who's denied of most rights otherwise, when she becomes a mother, she is declared supreme for sundry reasons. This is the earth goddess, again, a very potent and famous goddess. She's called the Ala or the Ani or the Ana. And the earth goddess is your original mother. She's the one who gives birth to babies. She's the one who allows women to have children, and therefore she's celebrated. And motherhood is something that is celebrated hugely across cultures within Africa, and very definitely within the Igbo society, from where Buchi Emecheta comes from. Um, So this is a definition of what is the earth, mortality, death, and fertility in Ujinani, and so on and so forth. You can read it yourself. So they're considered the highest Alusi in the Igbo pantheon, and was the first Alusi, daughter of Chukwu. Chukwu is this great god, the supreme god, and Ala's husband is Amadioha, who's the sky god. So there's the earth god and there's the sky god. So again, you can obviously see similarities between the Indian traditions and the African traditions, worshipping nature, worshipping the mother in various forms, and worshipping the sky, worshipping the wind. All of that, and the prioritization of the mother as is done by the society. So within the traditional Igbo society, motherhood is something which is greatly respected. Women are called the trees that bear fruit, because the tribe knew that without women to bear children, there would be no future for the clan. So the mothers were pampered, enjoyed a month totally devoid of work after the birth of the child. The ideal number of children was 7, because 7 meant a completeness of perfection in the tribal culture. And if a woman has even more children, she was considered to be exceptional. And if she had 10 children, then there would be a celebratory ritual which was held for her. And then every mother has something called an osoku. Osoku is like a traditional space. It's a nodal point of power. That derives not from the spiritual Ofo. So there are in the pantheon of gods also, you have the male gods and the female gods. The female gods have a specific kind of power, and one of the powers is the power to give children. And it is the center of a child's socialization activities, and the motherhood is the core of the Osoku formation and the seat of the mother's power. So the mother's power is considered to be very, very sacred, very, very potent, and something to be celebrated. So the principal function of the mother is to grow the lineage, as we all know it. And the core of the mother's power is what is called the Oma, the maternal force or spirit in the shrine of mothers. So Oma is encoded the maternal ideology, which is preserved Omumu, or the principle of reproduction. Another thing is when a woman dies, if she's been a mother and if she's a celebrated woman, she would be taken to her ancestral place, to her parents' place, to her mother's place to be buried, because that was supposed to be the space for her. Interestingly, not the husband's place. So this is the force by which the sacrificial offerings were made for women to become wives and to procreate. And Omumu was based on the bloodline of the mothers and derived from the maternal line. So a great deal of importance given to the maternal line, celebrations happening if a woman can become a mother. And then we have what I was initially mentioning, the concept of motherism. So whatever, and this is a very famous critic, her name is Acholunu, Catherine Obianju Acholunu. And what does she say about motherism? So whatever Africa's role may be in the global perspective, it can never be divorced from her quintessential position as the mother continent of humanity, nor is it coincidental that motherhood has remained the central focus of African art, African literature, especially women's writing, African culture, psychology, oral traditions, empirical philosophy. Africa's alternative to Western feminism is motherism, and motherism denotes motherhood, nature, and nurture. So, in such a perspective, you have Emitita talking about motherhood in a very different fashion. I will tell you the story because I don't have too much time to read quotes, but it's a book, you can pick it up and read it. Um, Before that, let me just give you the theoretical things a little fast, and then I'll tell you the story. So this is what is called a mamivata. It's a mermaid-like figure with a woman's upper body, which is often nude, and the hindquarters of a fish or a serpent. Now, mamivata is human. The existence and spiritual importance of Mamivata is rooted in the ancient tradition and mythology in the coastal southeastern Nigeria. Why am I talking about Mamivata here? Now, there are two ways of understanding motherhood. So, the one theory and the dominant theory is of motherism. The tribe, however, believes in Mamivata, and this is the second character I want you to look at. I don't know if the picture, this is something which, if I have to draw a comparison, I'm not a sociologist, so I don't know if I'm going to be doing it correctly. But if I have to draw a comparison, I would say it's something which would be like an Ardhanarishwar. So you have the Nari and the Purush together. So you have this character here who's Uhamiri, the goddess, who's complete in herself. She's not looking at a male figure or any other figure or children to complete her. She's a woman who's complete in herself, and she's got some male qualities and some female qualities, and she's very, very complete. Interestingly, both Nwapa does a lot of work on Uhamiri. Her characters are actually based on their Uhamiri worshippers. So you have Nwapa, who who is a true worshipper, if I may say so, of Uhamiri herself. The concept of the woman being complete in herself, and Emicheta, her soul sister or her writer sister, who also creates, therefore, this very interesting character called New Ego. That's the name of the protagonist, the lead protagonist. Now, very quickly, I'll tell you the story and where am I seeing the commonalities. I can also share my very old essay, which compares both these writers. So, New Ego was this. She was a tribal lord's daughter and very well brought up, and she's a very beautiful girl. And she gets married, and then everyone is waiting for the child to arrive. So when is she going to have a child, when is she going to have a child? And then she's not able to have a child, so they do all the required puja part, all the required, they call the dibia, that's the a medicine man. They call everybody, all kinds of things happen, but she's not able to conceive. So she gets so depressed that she tries to kill herself. And her first husband eventually divorces her. So then she marries this man, and she's taken to the city. This man who doesn't deserve her at all, but now she's rotten goods. She's not anymore that very beautiful girl who was a coveted lady. So now she goes to the city where this man, he works as a washerman in a colonial person's house. So while he's suffering because that he's insulted at his master's place, he takes it out on her at home. And then suddenly she starts having children, and she has multiple children. But with each childbirth and with each new mouth to feed, it starts to become very, very difficult for her, because having come from a very traditional household, she had been told by her parents that a woman does not wait for a man to feed her and her children. That is the woman's responsibility. But while she came from that space, within the city there was hardly anything which she could do. She was no longer in her traditional space. So it becomes increasingly difficult, but she manages. And then I won't go into the whole nitty-gritties of the story, but anyway, the good part is that her children eventually perform better. And then there are multiple other women there who are doing different things, including a co-wife of New Egos who goes out to become a prostitute because she cannot find a job for a woman within the organized society, which she could do and make money. So anyway, so New Ego continues to remain her pristine self, coming, retains all her, whatever she had learned growing up. And then eventually, she one day, when she's this great mother, but there's nobody to celebrate her because she's in the city and not in the village, which abides by these customs. She falls sick on the road, and then she collapses and she dies. And when she's dying, when she's collapsed, she's remembering her children, wanting her children to come to her, but obviously there was no child there, and she dies. When her children find out, they come, they consecrate that place, they make an image of hers, and they worship around the place, and they call their mother this very great lady. And then she becomes a goddess. And people start to flock to that goddess because this goddess had had so many children. So childless women would come to her, and other people would come to her and worship at her shrine. But New Ego seems to have become very intelligent after her death. She refuses to grant children to anybody. And it is said that Uhamiri devotees of Uhamiri, couldn't become mothers, but they became very rich. So I will not draw conclusions from these. The conclusions are for you to draw. But you see this very interesting thing happening here. Women, um, uh, the characters that Nwapa also talks about, they become very rich. They are very generous. They are good women, but they don't have children. In Nu Ego's case, she has children. She suffers her entire life, bringing them up, doing her best by them. But when she dies alone. And she refuses to bless people with children. And that's how the novel ends, the no explanations given after that. I will not talk very much about Mahashata, presuming the fact that you know her anyway. But the few things which one must say when one is discussing Mahashata, she's not your everyday writer. She didn't write for the sake of writing. She wrote always for a purpose. And she says, I've never had the capacity nor the urge to create art for art's sake. That's not something she did. Art was for a reason. um, you know her. I will not go into person that she was. Brilliant writer. You can her works, Hajatura Shirma, Rudali, Arun Nirodhikar, all of that. She won the Gyanpith, Padma Shri, Padma Vibhushan, the works. Um, what I've always found fascinating about Mahashata is her understanding of history and understanding of personal histories. What I was talking to you all earlier, how she goes to Bundelkhand and she sees that people are singing songs of the Rani of Jhansi years after she had died. So, what is her take on history? She says, I've believed the real history is made by ordinary people. I come across the appearance in various forms of folklore, ballads, myths, legends, carried by ordinary people across generations. The reason and inspiration for my writing are these people. Why should I look at raw material elsewhere once I started knowing them? Sometimes it seems my writing is their doing. And you all know that that big question that had been posed by Spivak, which we have talked about ad nauseum. Can the subaltern write? Well, Mahashata herself had an answer. She started Bortika, where people started writing their own stories. So the subaltern was very definitely speaking. It is only for people to read it. So um, oh, I didn't realize that I'd written this here. So Bortika, an answer to Can the Subaltern Speak? So yeah, so that's where we are. So real history made by ordinary people, folklores, ballads, and to answer Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak? How did Mahashita write? She wrote the Kolhan way. And what is the Kolhan way? Kolhan tribe. What is that way? To walk miles in godforsaken places, across jungles, over the hills. And there was a time when, there was a journalist following Mahashita, and people told the journalist, and that he was also an academic, don't listen to these people, they exaggerate. But Mahashita's way was always to listen. Oh, just 1 minute. Okay. I think probably my time is up, so I will quickly. So the text with which I'm making this comparison is Joshoda. It's one of her short stories. Joshoda is this story where it's from a myth, as you all know. Krishna's mother by hire is Joshoda. Now Joshoda is this woman who works in the Haldar household. In this case, her portfolio, as it is, I'll just take 2 minutes and wind up. Her portfolio is to feed the children of this house of this rich people, and in the process she has to remain pregnant constantly to be able to feed these countless children. And then she's deified as a mother goddess and all of that. And then when Joshoda dies, when Joshoda falls sick, she has cancer of the breast, her breasts are putrefied. She's dumped into the hospital, municipal hospital, where she keeps imagining that all her children, the ones that she has fed on her breast and the ones that her biological children, are all around her. In reality, there is no one, and then she dies. And I'll skip everything. It's called Breast Giver in English, by the way. I will end with this quote, which I find absolutely fascinating. Just a little before that, so we talk about the deification of women. We'll talk about reverse sexism. What is reverse sexism? Worshipping Devi on the one hand and dominating women simultaneously. Concept of motherhood in both spaces. And then I end with this quote: when a mortal masquerades as God here below, she's forsaken by all and she must be alone, as was the case of Nu Ego and Joshuda. And I'll stop here now and would love to hear you and your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Nandini. That was very, very interesting. But then we had to stop you in the middle. We are going to have another session with you very soon, and we can continue
Oh,
the
I can
wonderful
understand.
concepts that. Yes, yes. So the wonderful concepts that you have introduced to our students, like, motherhood studies, and then reverse sexism, and then, feminism with a small f. So these are new things for them, I'm sure. And then the writers like Mahashata Devi and all these African writers like Mapa and many of them and their lives and Chinu Achebe. The teachers are very, very inspired. They're going to read these concepts and definitely get back to you with researches like colonial and post-colonial narratives in African literature, then folklore and oral traditions in African and Indian traditions, and linguistic traditions and identity that you hinted at, then the representation of gender and subaltern voices. This is so very important as a part of our research, and then land displacement and environmental justice. That is one thing that is my takeaway from your research. And then rewriting history through literature. You have attempted to rewrite the history of two countries through literature, and maybe you are majorly successful at that. And then intersections of class, caste, and race. Yes, you talked about these important issues. And then translation and cultural transmission. So there are so many things that your lecture was pregnant with so many ideas, so many thoughts, and I think every sentence that you uttered can lead to one extensive, one complete lecture. So probably we're going to invite you many more times to talk to our teachers. Dr. Paramita is getting restless. I have so much to say. Even many teachers and students have so much to say. But I think time is up, Dr. Paramita. Please take over and then note that we are going to invite Professor Nandini for another lecture very, very soon. Thank you so much for being a part of Hindi University Lecture Series with your
Definitely, and
wonderful
sorry,
lecture.
sorry for that. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Professor Nandini Sen, ma'am, for such an informative and inspiring lecture. And all the questions of the students and participants will be sent to the speakers for response due to the paucity of time. Once again, I would like to thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor, ma'am, Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, Professor Nandini Sen, ma'am, Professor Nandini Sinha Kapur, ma'am, and all the participants for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so
Thank you
much
so
for
much.
having me and all the very best. Thank you,
And
Professor
thank
Sahu.
you. Yes, thanks, Professor
Absolutely.
Nandini Senna Kapur. Thanks, Professor Nandini Sen. Namaskar.
Namaskar.